Good evening and welcome to Mindful Live 471. I am your host, Nathan Springer. Thank you for joining me. We don't have the real host. I'm really the co-host. The real host is on the inside already, thankfully. We're figuring it out, us and the real host. Us and the real host are out here working this all out. So welcome. Once you're on the inside, make sure you hit that like button, double tap the screen over there on TikTok. If you are looking at it live out there, hit that double tap out there, and that's how you hit the like button. If you are viewing this live on YouTube, please do hit that like button also. Drop a comment if you have something to say. Please drop that comment. Tell me what you think. If you are not yet subscribed, please do subscribe. You're viewing this live on TikTok and you are not yet subscribed to Nathan Springer out there on YouTube. Make sure you get that subscription going. Make sure you're now subscribed to Nathan Springer over there on YouTube. Get it up. You can catch all of the lives over there if you ever miss a live and you wanted to take it in and you're wondering how are we on 471. What we spoke about for the other 470 lives? Well, head over to YouTube and you will find out. Make sure you're subscribed there. So what are we talking about this evening? Interesting stuff, interesting geopolitical moves. We are on the global scale right now, the global stage, as one Mr. President Donald Trump is making moves America first, apparently, and it's having an effect on the Caribbean here. It's having a shake-up effect on the Caribbean. Let's look at that story and dive in one time. Rowley rejects US visa threat. Rowley say, you can't threaten me. I am not taking that threat, apparently. Let's dive in and look at that right after I just organize this here. Defense using Cuban medical personnel. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has vowed to protect Trinidad and Tobago's sovereignty, even if it means never returning to the United States. The Prime Minister addressed concerns regarding the United States government's stance on Cuban labor, particularly the interpretation of Cuba's medical program as human trafficking. Apparently, we are trafficking in humans now, according to the Americans, by their say-so. He was speaking yesterday at the official commemoration ceremony marking the practical completion of the construction of the Port of Spain General Hospital Central Block. Just by the way, on the point of the practical completion, that seems like a dubious at best kind of term. What do you mean the practical completion? So it's not completed. So you all are opening it before it's completed, really and truly. So you're getting the juice before the lime ripe. You're getting that boost, that election year boost of opening this massive wing of the hospital before it's really finished. Practical completion. All right, sure. You know, I love these technical terms. They're the technical terms that allow you to lie with a little special term now. Lie with extra steps. It's not quite a lie. It's a lie-ish with extra steps. So he was talking at the opening of the not really open Port of Spain General Hospital Central Block that they're working on right now. The block that they opened, that work is still currently ongoing on. The Prime Minister raised the point as he pointed that Trinidad and Tobago hires healthcare specialists from other countries to work in the nation's hospitals. He emphasized that as a former the University of the West Indies student, he was pleased to hear the Central Block would provide healthcare training in partnership with the university. He then touched on the US-Cuba issue. Remember what happened during COVID when vaccines were required and we couldn't buy one even though we had the money, and even when And even where we paid the money, those we paid put us at the back of the line. And listen, some of the information coming out now out of the whole COVID vaccine business, maybe, just maybe, us being a small fry, us being the proverbial cockroach in the fowl party, may have worked to our benefit, because some of the news coming out of the vaccine seem to say that maybe at best it was a kind of 50-50 throw up in the air. So yeah, we had the money to buy it, and they kind of sidelined us because we didn't have the weight and the clout. But those who got the vaccines, how much better did they fare? Can we look at any one country and say, wow, that vaccination program seemed to have really nipped the whole COVID business in the bud? So maybe that wasn't too bad of a thing, Doc. Maybe, just maybe. But Dr. Rowley went on. Right now they are telling us something else. We rely a lot for our healthcare delivery on certain specialists who over the decades we have obtained from India, from the Philippines, sometimes from Africa, and mainly from Cuba. Out of the blue, we are now being called human traffickers because we hire technical people whom we pay top dollar equal to local rates, but we are now being accused of taking part in a program where people are being exploited. He continued, that's somebody's interpretation, and of course there are local people here encouraging them to take away our US visas. I just came back from California, and if I never go back there again in my life, I will ensure that the sovereignty of Trinidad and Tobago is known to its people and respected by all, he said, to applause. Now, what I'm saying is, I appreciate the strategy of the US move here. They know that the Caribbean and its people love the America. They know the Caribbeaners love a good America. Oh, sweet Douglas. They know the Caribbeaners love a good little Americana boy. So, let's not get in the bad books of the Caribbean citizens. The citizenry, the rank and file of the Caribbean people, the whiners, and maybe schemers out there, let's not get on their nerves. You know what we're going to do? We want to make a geopolitical move. We'll target the leaders only. So, this move will ban the visa for diplomats and leaders. So and their family. Because we know that nearly every single Caribbean leader up and down the archipelago, nearly everyone, their children don't live in their countries, you know. At least they don't spend a lot of time there. Almost all the children of the elite, they are like garlings. They are like scarlet ibis. They fly out morning, fly in evening, stay there for the summer, stay here for the winter, over there, over here, have a house here, have a house there. Well, that may end. Someone asked, even retired ones. I don't know how far it would be extended, and it seems like the CARICOM leaders aren't even very sure about how far it would be extended to. I think it would be extended based on how much pressure they want to put. Good night, Joy. Blessed night, blessed night. I think it would be based on how much pressure they're looking to put on the leaders. That's how far they may send it. So maybe it might not make sense to put it on a retired official if they are part of the opposition. But maybe if you're talking about Dr. Rowley after he's retired, maybe they may still put it on him, because putting it on him would put pressure on the government to make the decision that they want them to make. And at the end of the day, the decision they want the governments to make is separating from Cuba. Do not do business and dealings with Cuba. Now, the reason ostensibly that the US is giving is they're calling this basically like trafficking. It's they're forcing labor, allegedly, out of Cuba. The Cubans are abusing these doctors. Because here's what the allegation is. Dr. Rowley said that we pay the Cuban doctors top dollar, competitively. Otis says BS. And previously you said Manning stood up to Bush previously on this issue. Okay, is it BS? Are you sure? Do the doctors collect the salaries that we pay them? Do the Cuban doctors that we hire, do they have bank accounts where we send that salary to them personally? Otis? Do we? Because Cuba is basically a Marxist nation. They are collectivists. The state owns the means of production, as they say. So, is it that the individual Cuban doctors come to Trinidad and work, but we pay the money to the state? Otis, I'd like to tell you, we don't. We don't pay the money to the individual doctors. According to the information coming out, they say sometimes usually between 75 to 90% of the money paid to those doctors goes to the Cuban state. You see, I think people don't understand what communism is, you know. People don't understand what communism is. You are not supposed to collect private salaries. There isn't private labor and private ownership of one's labor in communism, really and truly. So, according to the communist principle, that would make sense. And here's something to wonder. Cuba is a country where people attempt to run away all the time. Regularly, when Cuba sends sporting teams out, many of these sportsmen and sportswomen defect. Why do you think Cuban doctors do not defect from Cuba when they're sent out? If a Cuban doctor is sent to Trinidad and Tobago to work, and let's say 80% of their salary is being taken by the Cuban government, why doesn't that doctor just say, forget about this, I'm leaving Cuba, I am going to go to the United States? Why doesn't the doctor say that? Why do you think a Cuban doctor wouldn't defect away from Cuba? Is it that all Cuban doctors just love Cuba that much? They are just so fiercely nationalist. They have so much pride in Cuba that they will never defect for any reason. Do you think that's it? The source of that information is Marco Rubio and the State Department. That's the source of that information. That's what they allege. Let me see if I could wiggle down rather to the exact source of this. I will have to do some research on this. Yes, it's the State Department. And here's the question. It's Neil. Here's the question. If you're doubting this, do you think the Cuban doctors are paid that salary personally? And if so, why would they return to Cuba? Given the U.S. historical misrepresentation of geopolitical info, do you believe it credible? I agree with you, but here's why I do. Cuba has a problem with defection. why don't the doctors defect? 1. 2. Cuba is communist. In a communist country, would they allow their doctors to go and make private salaries in foreign countries? That would not be in line with the communist ideal. So, in terms of the right way of doing communism, Cuba is right. If you are a communist, what Cuba is doing is correct. Communism from him according to his ability, to him according to his need. So the Cuban doctors make money for the state, and the state redistributes this money to the entirety of the country so that everyone benefits. That's the idea of communism. So as the doctors go out, they make money for Mother Cuba, and Cuba would return this money to all of the citizens so that they all benefit equally. That's the idea of communism. So if Cuba is to maintain their communist ideal, they should be doing this. That's the right thing for them to do. You all understand what I mean? And then that's on the salary side. On the side of why they don't defect. On the side of why they don't defect. It is reputed that in many cases, their families, if not directly, indirectly, or by suggestion, are hostages. If you disobey when you go out there, your family back here, your family back here is going to be punished. Neil says no country in our world ever achieved communism. Socialism is what most have. That's true, but not true at the same time. It's like, okay, no country has achieved it because it is impossible by human nature. But that hasn't stopped many a country from trying. That hasn't stopped many a country from trying. So, by that reasoning, is it actually exploitative and trafficking? Is it? If indeed, when we pay the Cuban doctors, and this is where I would like to see our journalists come in. I would like to see a journalist ask Dr. Rowley, do we pay our Cuban doctors directly? Or do we pay a fund or a Cuban account on their behalf? Is it to personal accounts? Can Cuban doctors come to Trinidad and open up a Scotia bank account and get their money sent there? I'd like to ask that to Dr. Rowley. Because if it is indeed that the money goes directly to the Cuban doctors, our government should know that. While if it is indeed the money goes more directly to the Cuban state, then our government would know that also. Wide Leather says, what wrong with the thousands of unemployed doctors coming out of university? Well, to some extent, and Dr. Rowley spoke about it, it's specialists they're talking about. It's specialists they're talking about. So, doctors coming out of the university aren't yet specialists. If it's training, train them. True. Joy says, do these journalists educate themselves enough on the subject to ask these questions? You'd have to ask that to the journalists, I guess. I understand your point, but I have deep mistrust for the US government with very good reason, it's Neil. With extremely good reason. And that's why my take on this isn't to believe the US government. It's to look at the evidence as they're outlaying it. And the evidence as they put it out there seems to make sense to me. It seems obvious to me that a communist country will not allow individual doctors to make exorbitant salaries. That, I don't think that would happen. It goes against the communist ideals. So it's not like the suggestion of such is something that Cuba would deny or Cuba has denied, or it isn't in line with what they might. No, it seems perfectly in line with what they might do. It's not something that's difficult to believe.
Similarly, the fact that often what communist countries do to ensure that those they send out do not defect is they threaten families inside. North Korea sends out a football team, and all of the football team families are kept under close watch on the inside. Communism has nothing to do with exorbitant salaries. It has to do with ownership of resources and capital. And salaries are what? And salaries, the intake of capital or resources. It's like, okay, eating has nothing to do with rice and peas. Eating has to do with food. Come on. Just work one step further. One step further. So, nuts boss, are you saying that you think Cuban doctors are paid their salaries personally? That they gain their own salaries for them to use as they see fit? Do you think so? I don't. No forced labor. Last month, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, hey Paradise G, Marco Rubio announced an expanded policy targeting Cuban forced labor. Under this policy, visa restrictions will apply to current or former Cuban government officials believed to be responsible for or involved in the Cuban labor export program, particularly Cuba's overseas medical missions. In a statement on February 25th, 2025, Rubio said the move aims to hold accountable those responsible for or complicit in the exploitation of Cuban workers, particularly in overseas medical missions. Bear in mind, Marco Rubio is a Cuban American, so he would have, if not personal grouse, personal knowledge of some of this. It's Neil says I've actually been to Cuba, and a lot of what is represented in the Western media is not accurate. They are an extremely resourceful people. I believe you. So wait now, Cuban doctors' salary is being taxed here and over there. Nutsball says the standard of living in Cuba makes it harder for highly skilled labor to earn a fair share. What do you mean by that? I'm not sure what you mean by that. And it's Neil. I don't know. I don't know if I am taking the suggestion about Cuba itself being of a certain level from media statements. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm just looking at it from a practical perspective. Okay. I do not think that the autocratic, collectivist, Marxist government of Cuba would allow individuals to earn, and as Dr. Rowley boasted, comparable competitive salaries on the outside. I just don't think so. They can earn much more outside comparative to their cost of living in another country. And yes, they can earn more outside, but do you think they get to keep all that they earn, nuts boss? Curvon says the intellectual elite of the Caribbean has a soft spot for the commies. We always did. Listen, the intellectual elite, to truth be told, the intellectual elite all around the world have a soft spot for leftism, because nearly anyone who was educated in university, basically anyone with a bachelor's degree, was taught some level of Marxism. A significant portion of our elite educated world, the intellectuals, are leftists. It's in their teaching. It's what they teach. Many university professors are leftists by their preference, and they teach it to their students. They teach it to their students. So many intellectuals do have that soft spot for leftism. You know, I have been diving a lot into the African history and African leaders and something and so on. And African leaders also have a soft spot for leftism and Marxism. But what you notice is a lot of the times the history of these African leaders is like the same thing. So they see some promising young African, they carry him to some European university to educate him. And in the university, in the European universities, they teach them leftism, Marxism, that kind of more revolutionary political ideology. And then they go back to their African countries, and the European education system teaches them revolutionary Marxism, but the European political system punishes them for acting out that. It's like a cruel kind of pairing there. You went and teach the fellas how to be good Marxists. They go back in their country, implement it, and you vex. You want to pay somebody to go and do a coup against them now. But you all who taught them about Marxism, we would not accept that arrangement for ourselves, but are happy to support it, to support Havana. And that's what I'm saying, Cuban. Like, we really have to take a good look at it. And that's why I would like to hear some journalists, some reporters ask this of our leaders, ask this of Dr. Rowley, ask this of Mr. Terence Dial Singh. Let's get an answer on this. Do we send the money knowing what we're doing? Do we send the money off to the Cuban state while we work the Cuban individuals? Reach late, but what is the update with the US visas? No direct updates on that. No direct updates on that. Don't take that chain. Some of them are Wharton and Ivy League graduates. They just know how to talk down to their plebs. I'm not saying that the revolutionaries are good people. I'm just saying that this was something taught. I don't think leftism is good. I think it's counterproductive to human flourishing. I think it's one of the worst political ideologies to set itself on humanity. I think it's the opposite of progress. I think it's theft. I think it's morally wrong. At the core of it is a moral fallacy. It doesn't understand human nature. And as I said, two things: it doesn't understand human nature, and it's morally wrong. Because to take from me my labor is to steal from me. So it's not that I'm saying they're right. I'm just saying that they were taught this and went back home with something that they were taught. Cuban says more, but Dr. Rowley is not observing real politics. The US is winning battles at the moment. This is not the hill to die on. Yeah. The US is moving in a different kind of modus operandi. The idea that, we all must go to the UN and discuss as equals and come to a rules-based solution. The US is saying to hell with that. Well, at least this present US administration. They're negotiating on the merits. So even something as simple as the reciprocal tariffs, I'm wondering how is that even going to affect the Caribbean at the end of the day. I am sure CARICOM has some serious tariffs on American goods so that they won't flood the Caribbean market. So when those reciprocal tariffs hit, what then? But in a true sense, can we be upset with the United States for seeking their best interests. Like I'm listening to Dr. Rowley talk about this, and he's saying as an independent country, we have a right to chart our own destiny basically, and decide on our own who we are going to have diplomatic relations with. And I agree 100% with him. But doesn't that carry over to the United States also? Don't they get to set their own foreign policy as they see fit for their best interests? Can't they determine who they want to play with too? And okay, we could select that we want to play with the Cubans and we want to play with the Venezuelans if we so see fit. But then the Americans could say, well, okay, well, we don't want to play with you. And isn't that fair in all senses? It's their toy. And that's why I say, like, the idea of fairness, where it's unfair, and why is that fair, and why is that? That's gonna hurt a lot of people. That's gonna hurt a lot of people. Because there isn't that. I was looking at, as you're talking about Grand Charge and Gun Talk, one week and next, all of them falling in line. We saw that with Mexico. We saw that with Zelensky, big talk and thing, and all funding cut, all assistance cut, all aid cut. And what would you know? Zelensky is back at the negotiation table, cap in hand. Sorry, sir. I saw a Canadian premier saying they were going to hike up energy prices and cut the power for Americans based on the tariffs that are carded to kick in. Well, the Americans said, well, if you do that, the tariffs that we already put on, we're going to increase it more, a further to 50%. And what would you know? The premier came out and I'm heading down to the US to have discussions, and we're changing our policy and what we said before. And like, as was said in the whole bacchanal, in the whole kerfuffle with Zelensky, you don't have the cards. And yes, we functioned in a rule-based order where you have to follow the rules whether you had the cards or not. But now it seems like a different order where it's according to what cards you have. So I would suggest to any leader, especially ours here in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean as in the wider sense, look at your hand, figure out the cards you have in your hand, and play accordingly. You have to decide. Okay, this present US administration is saying we can't be friends with everybody at the same time. Is the Putin, the president of Russia, communist and President Xi, leader of CCP, as far as I understand, Putin is not communist exactly. He's an authoritarian, he's a dictator, but he is not exactly communist. From what I could tell, I don't know if Putin is too heavily ideological in any direction. I would call him a pragmatist. He is looking for what works for his ends, what he wants to accomplish, whatever means he needs to go through to get that, he's cool with that. The US is imploding under their present administration, Joy says. I guess we would see, Joy. I guess we would see. People are saying, so I see the stock market is dropping, but according to them, they predicted as much. They're saying they expected as much, and the reasoning they are giving is the previous administration's work. And to some extent, that kind of adds up. I'm not sure how much the current administration could do to really have an effect on their economy as it stands. I think some of that is layover from previous. Do you really believe that this is as simple as the US just wanting to associate with you with who they wish? No, I don't think so, it's Neil. I think it's the US wanting power, the US wanting geopolitical power. They want to tell you who to play with. They want to exercise power over you. And if they could keep the Caribbean within their fold, they are going to make more money and they are going to have more benefit from it. Of course, I do believe that. Yes, I don't think that the US is doing this because they care oh so much about the poor Cuban doctors and they don't want to see the Cuban doctors abused and hurt. I don't actually believe that. I don't. No. But as I said, if that is what they are projecting, we have to act accordingly. And I think it was kind of always that way. I believe even in the rules-based order that we functioned before, we functioned on that level because it benefited those at the top of that level. It's not that they actually loved the rules and they actually believed that this was equitable and helped everyone in the... No, they... Didn't we just look at the breakdown of USAID and see that many of these people who are promoters of the rules-based order were holding positions in 50 different NGOs, bleeding the world dry of money for doing nothing? It's Neil says, so at what point do you push back and stand on principle? Well, at the point where you believe the principle is worth it. So what principle are we going to stand on here? What would be the principle? That we believe the Cuban doctors are not being exploited, so we are going to stand on that principle? Because I don't believe that. What is the principle we'd be standing on? White supremacy at its best? What are you talking about, Joy? What are you speaking of? In what context? Yes, he is, Nil. Yes, he is. But that could be also a matter of pragmatism. Joy, ease up on the MSNBC, okay? Ease up on the MSNBC. It's not a healthy diet. It really is not. And it stops you from having a clear critical view of things. The principle to determine your own international policies. Well, we still have that. But in determining your own international policies, you must balance your pros and cons. So we can determine that we interact with Cuba or Venezuela and have close diplomatic ties. We have that prerogative. But we also must understand that if we do so, we are going to sacrifice certain relationships. That's life. That has been life in every context. When you didn't get your allowance 1 week back in the teenage days, what was your leverage? Did you arbitrate, Daddy? Show me your companion and I'll tell you who you are. Well, to some extent, you could... Not you, but some people do excuse Russia in the sense that Russia is squeezed into being friends with those guys. Russia asked to be part of NATO and they were refused. So maybe Russia would have been closer friends with the United States and Europe if given the chance. But they weren't given the chance, so who are they going to be friends with but those guys? If a medical staff defect, they are not allowed to return home in 8 years. Cuban says, truth is we have to deal with Caracas. We are in a tough spot here. Yes, we are. And that's why it needs shrewd leadership. Because we are the neighbors of Caracas. We cannot pick up Trinidad and Tobago and move it away from Venezuela. Venezuela are our neighbors. We cannot change that fact. It would not be a good idea, I think, to be in enmity with Venezuela. Like, I think the road our opposition leader is going down might not be a wise idea. If indeed Venezuela is a narco state, and you are the leader of Trinidad and Tobago, and you are in active opposition to a narco state to your south, are they going to be working against you? Do you want cartels actively trying to bring down your country, I don't think that would be a wise idea. Ukraine balanced its pros and cons and gave up its nuclear arms in exchange for guaranteed protection from US, Britain, France, and Russia. Look what it got them. 100% it's nil. Russia didn't ask to be part of NATO. It's nil. Russia did ask to be part of NATO. That's widely known news. Putin had that discussion since Clinton days. That's widely known. Google it. Not only is Venezuela our neighbors, our DMW MP is also Caracas. I am not going down that road with you, wide level. I'm not going down that road with you. But it's name. What was the guy's name? I believe it was Kissinger. Said that it's a very dangerous place to be America's enemy, but it's even more dangerous to be their friend. It's Neil says, in fact, they asked that NATO not extend to the borders. Yes, they did. And that was part of the deal with the whole giving up the nukes business, that NATO would not extend eastward. And NATO did. Yes, I know that. But also, Russia did ask to become part of NATO. So, there are those realities. There are those realities. And as I was saying, you have to deal with it as it is. So stand on principle in what sense? Yes, the principle that we can decide our own fate is still very much true. But as has always been the case, there are consequences to it. There are opportunity costs. So you can't, as a man, in a monogamous situation, you have to choose one. Yes, Shirley real best and Patsy best too, but you can't choose Shirley and Patsy. And if you choose Shirley, Patsy will be upset, and if you choose Patsy, Shirley would be upset. That's just life. So who do you want to be more friends with? Is there more benefit to being friends with Caracas? Is there more benefit to being friends with Havana? Or is there more benefit to being friends with Washington, D.C.? Marshall say we could have the cake and eat it too. No, we cannot actually. A commission of inquiry was held in Trinidad to terrorize the trade unionists who traveled to Cuba. Well, the truth is, trade unionists are leftists. The reality is, trade unions are born out of the same political ideology to some extent. Sweet Douglas says, no, we can balance. I don't doubt that we can, but it needs discussion for it to happen. So you are correct, they had asked to form an alliance with Ukraine and Belarus. You are correct or I am incorrect? Are you saying I am correct or incorrect on that? So yes, I believe we can balance. I believe we can balance it. But that requires strategic and wily diplomacy. I do not think our opposition is doing the kind of diplomacy required to do that. I don't think it's a good idea for Trinidad and Tobago to jump into the MAGA camp. We are not MAGA. You cannot be on Team Make America Great Again. Because Team Make America Great Again cannot be Team Make Trinidad Succeed to the Maximum. That does not add up. So I disagree with that. But at the same time, you cannot be Team Anti-MAGA. You cannot be the team against MAGA because they are in charge. It's like Padnaman Zelensky out in Ukraine. Brother man, the United States is in an election. What is your business going into the country to campaign for another party? Are you insane, sir? Like, come on. It's not a winning strategy. You have to balance. You have to balance. So I do think that we could strike a balance where we deal with the Venezuelans on face value and we maintain a close friendly relationship with the United States. I believe we can strike that balance. And how you strike that balance, I guess I'm not in on the details of all those deals, but you're gonna have to be able to wheel and deal and strategize well. Remember Zelensky with between a rock and a hard. Well, Zelensky in a real hard spot. I do not envy that man's position. I do not want to be that man. But I still thought that was unwise. You're putting your eggs in one basket by doing that. You're depending on that team winning, and unfortunately, that team didn't win. So the position you put yourself in is a strained position. I was looking at a Singaporean. And you know, Singapore is a jewel of the world when it comes to management, how they manage their country. And he was a geopolitical expert. And he was talking about that, how Singapore has to deal with the United States as a major trading partner, as how you get connection to the global money train, you'd have to deal with the United States. But at the same time, they are within the geopolitical sphere, the geographical sphere of China. They cannot pick up their country and move out of being within China's backyard. So they always have to deal with China on a neighbor level. They can't talk about China as some idea halfway across the world. They are in their backyard. So you have to deal with them continually. So you can't go all in on Team United States, but you can't go all in on Team China. Maybe you try to strike a balance where you try to convince China that you could be a go-between between them and the United States, and you try to convince the United States that you could be a go-between between them and China. Maybe that's something we could try here in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm not saying it would work, but it's an idea. Maybe we could be the catalyst to try to, work whatever change we want to work in Venezuela. Maybe we could sign up for the CIA to allow them to use us as a staging area to launch one of their ever famous coups. Because I'm sure they're working on a coup for Venezuela. 100%. The CIA is always working on. I don't doubt the CIA probably has a playbook of who to talk to for a coup for every single country in the world. They already have the person in mind if they want to run a coup in Trinidad and Tobago, who they have to talk to for that. So maybe there's an idea. Okay, we work with you and we say, all right, we're going to tip over Maduro government. So we work with you and we get somebody on the inside, and who knows? It's Neil says in 2014, US and Britain assisted in the overthrow of the Ukrainian government and installed a pro-NATO government. Yes, they did. And they boasted about it. They boasted about selecting who would be the president of another country. Yes, they did. Wasn't only Ukraine though they did it all over the world. The Arab Spring wasn't all springy, like coming naturally out of the soil. No, the Arab Spring came out of the aquifer of the CIA. So yes, they do it. They do it. It's not unfamiliar, and that's the reality. That's the reality of geopolitics. As the Trinidad and Tobago government, do you assist the US in undermining Venezuela if it has benefit for you? Or do you go on Team Venezuela and attempt to be, as somebody said, I didn't say that, somebody in the chat alleged that our future Prime Minister is the number one foreign, what do you call him, foreign diplomat for Venezuela? Maybe that could happen. Maybe we could be the negotiating team on behalf of Venezuela. It might be a very dangerous position to put yourself in, but why not? Get an idea out of Maduro. Maduro is willing, I'm just making a hypothetical. Let's say he's hypothetically willing to allow some US companies to go in, and a US company is going to be the partner in Dragon deal. Why not? If it benefits us, linking a US company, allow them to get their pound of flesh out and see what happens on the tail end for our benefit. That's the decisions you have to make. Those are the decisions that have to be made. And I don't think we could afford to pretend to be principled. Not that we can't afford to be principled, but to pretend to be principled. Because the reality is, in many of these, when it comes to governments, when it comes to the governments of countries, in almost all the cases, they aren't as principled as they say. They pretend to be that principled. American Ambassador Bond was never seen in Ministry of National Finance, but was special guest to Naf Balize meetings. All right. But even so, Bond was of the last administration. That's why you have to be careful what you say. You have to be careful what you say. Someone was asking if Dragon gas deal is in trouble. Dragon warning. Rowley foresees trouble if gas deal goes sour. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has warned that this country's cuckoo will be cooked if the Dragon gas deal with Venezuela goes sour. The Prime Minister yesterday expressed confidence that Trinidad and Tobago was on solid footing with respect to its agreements, but cautioned that there could be calamity in terms of paying the nation's bills if the United States revokes the license approved for the Dragon gas deal, or if Venezuela decides not to allow Trinidad and Tobago to access the gas. Rowley was speaking at the official commemoration ceremony marking we know all of that hospital bacchanal. He pointed out that when one attends a game, they cheer for their team to win, not to lose. So I'm asking the rest of you to send your telepathic power to overcome this negative nonsense about the failure of the Dragon deal, because what we have been able to accomplish there, if I may say so myself, is a marvelous surprise to many people, because our gas within our borders is running out, he said. Neil says BRICS is a growing thorn in the backside of Western Europe, US economic dominance, weakening the grip on the colonies, example Africa. Yes, it is a thorn in their side. A thorn that Trumpy, Mr. Orange Guy, has decided he intends to root out. So this is part of the whole BRICS, anti-BRICS movement here also, where if you deal with the people that are opposing their economic interests, they are going to harm you. So, under the previous US administration, under the Biden administration, I believe they sent out envoys to go all over the world and tell people, don't sign on to the China Belt and Road Initiative. Don't, please don't. That's how they did it. But Trumpy, Orange Guy, Big Orange, it seems like his idea of how to do it is not to send out the diplomats, but to send out punishments. Anybody dealing with BRICS is going to not be able to deal with us. And listen, from an American perspective, if I were an American, that kind of makes sense. Why would the United States work along with a group that intends to depose them from their top position? And the United States is going to continue trading beneficially with Trinidad and Tobago, while Trinidad and Tobago starts to become more loyal to an opposing group. That doesn't make sense from their decision-making point of view. It doesn't. So, like, from their point of view, I don't really blame them. It's just from every country's point of view now, you have to take what's best for your country. You have to go in the direction that's best for your country. So maybe BRICS might be beneficial to some countries that never had much dealings with the United States anyway. I never dealt, if I was a country that never had much dealing with the United States anyway, and the benefit I get from BRICS is way higher than any kind of benefit I got from dealing with the United States anyway, then of course I'm going to choose BRICS. Why must our country economic stability be compromised because of US foreign policy? Because that has always been how everything in the world runs. Our economic stability is dependent on the foreign policy of all major world powers. That has always been the case. Always. It has never not been the case. Even under the previous Biden administration, we had to apply to get the license from the United States to do dealings with our neighbor Venezuela. Our economic stability was already dependent on US foreign policy. And here's the thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. I was reading the history. Who was that? Was that Lumumba? Thomas Lumumba in Africa? One of the leaders, I believe, of Burkina Faso back in the 20th century there. And one of his aims was to make their country so self-sufficient that they don't need to go to the IMF, they don't need to go to the World Bank, they don't... No, but it wasn't Patrice Lumumba. It wasn't Patrice Lumumba. It was Thomas something. Thomas, is it Thomas? Something out of Burkina Faso. The name is slipping me. But yeah, he wanted to make their country so self-sufficient that they don't need to go to the IMF, they don't need to go to the World Bank, they don't need to make compromising outside decisions because they can see about themselves. So if the US issues a trade embargo against you, Sankara, thank you Neil, Thomas Sankara, that's the guy. So if the US issues a trade embargo against you, it has zero effect because you never needed them for anything anyway. And we could do that. That could be the direction a country goes in. So we could decide that we deal with Venezuela on a face-to-face level and forget about the United States. But we need to have changes to do that. We can't be dependent on US products and then want to do that. So in a sense, the reason our economic stability is dependent on their foreign policy is because we decided to hitch ourselves to them. And we didn't have to, but there were benefits to doing so. We like the frosted flakes, we like the imported products from them, so we got the benefits. And we hitched our wagon there. But that didn't have to be done. Like Cuba. Cuba doesn't have to depend on the US to decide what they're going to do because the US has already cut them off. So they could make decisions based on their own personal interests. Now, the unfortunate part of all of that is that even if you do so, Mr. Thomas Sankara was murdered in his 30s. His body was cut up and buried in an unmarked grave. And his right-hand man took over rule with alleged CIA help and support. So that's the other balancing part of that, where even if potentially you might succeed in separating yourself and making your country all independent and stuff, well, there are other kinds of powers to go along with that. And that's just the reality of the world we live in. It is. A bigger guy than you can beat you up. Reality. maybe you join together with some smaller guys to work better, to maybe put up some defense. But then, how is the joining working? Because even joining with the smaller guys are hedging their bets because they want what's best for them. So CARICOM is joined together. CARICOM is joined together. But we can't even get the CSME going fully. We can't even get the freedom of movement going fully because individual countries in CARICOM are worried that the poorer countries would overrun them if they allow too much easy free trade and free movement. So every country has their own interest. Every country is seeking their own interests. And where we could exert power, we do. Where we can't, we don't. Reality. Jiangsu province donates $300,000 to steel pan apprenticeship program. I just saw this story and thought, it fits in with all of this stuff. We're making decisions, and China has a lot of money. China has a lot of cash, a lot of US cash, ironically enough. So we could decide to take Chinese money and get the benefits that come from that, or not. It's Neil says, but you just give an example of how the free US eliminates people who don't fall in line. Yes, because free, as you put it, is in quotations. And free is a relative kind of view. So I do consider the US free. Certainly freer than many of the alternative options. And I think some people are dishonest in their evaluations, where if you had a choice, many of these people would prefer to live as a regular citizen in the United States than as a regular citizen in China, Cuba, Venezuela, or any other country for that matter. Is there really a free market? No. The market isn't really free. There are freer markets and less free markets, but the market isn't totally free, no. It could be argued, though, that the current policies that the US are pursuing are aiming to free up the market more. And you see, the reality is, in a free market, he who have more corn feed more fowl. And that's kind of the issue with a free market that some people have. If the whole world were a free market, the largest companies are able to very easily outcompete from the smaller companies. So, do we really even fully want that? You have to play the game that you can play. I 100% agree with that, Mr. Curveball. Let me just browse one more article before we dive out here. Judge warns authorities on conduct after 2011 SOE raid lawsuit. Listen. I hope they know what they're doing in this state of emergency. And this is why I take statements from the opposition with pinches of salt, with handfuls of salt. Because they're talking about what to do and what not to do and what should do, but we are still paying out money from the 2011 SOE. A High Court judge has cautioned members of the protective services to be mindful of their language and conduct while executing their duties. Justice Frank C. Prasad gave the advice after ruling in favor of a Chaguanas woman who endured degrading treatment during a 2011 state of emergency raid. C. Prasad awarded Sujis McIntosh $60,000 plus interest for assault, battery, and false imprisonment after she and 6 others were subjected to mistreatment by soldiers and Coast Guard officers during a raid at Gaspar Grande on August 31st, 2011. McIntosh was among a group of 4 men, one of whom was her boyfriend, and 3 women at a house on the island of Chaguaramas when soldiers and Coast Guard personnel stormed the premises around 4 a.m. She recounted that everyone in the house was taken to the beachfront before being forced back inside. According to a lawsuit, the men were called upstairs first, and she heard screams, breaking objects, and what sounded like beating. meetings. The three women were then summoned, made to kneel, and forced to hold empty bottle cases over their heads while being interrogated about drugs and guns. She testified that soldiers made derogatory remarks, questioning if they were lesbians and mocking their appearance. Among these statements were, "Olye Zami, what are you doing with these ugly fellows? Watch your face. You have a kind of F face. I wouldn't put myself with you." Cuban says, "Honestly, I'm very disappointed with the UNC. I would not be surprised if the PNM actually wins." I have been making this my prediction for quite some time now. I said as long as the opposition leader remains, I don't see the PNM losing. I just don't. I don't see how it happens. And if you look at the parties right now, I do believe that there's some strategic resignation there to attempt to put pressure on the current leadership of the UNC. But if you look at the parties, which party is having more internal conflict going into the election? The UNC. Every day there's a high-profile resignation out of the UNC. They're under serious strain at the executive level right now. Sweet Douglas says, "You feel so?" Yes, I do feel so. And here's the reason I feel so. The question I ask myself is, okay, PNM won in 2015, PNM won in 2020. What or which voter that voted for the PNM in 2015 and in 2020 changed their mind in the preceding 5 years? Which voter do you think would have voted for the PNM in 2015 and 2020, but now in 2025 something changed and they're changing their mind? Like, do you think so? What would change their mind? Which voter? Take care, you get an upset in it. I wouldn't be upset, to be honest with you. I am not vested in it like that. I am just saying what my prediction is based on the facts as I see it. So it wouldn't upset me like that, but it's what I'm seeing. Which voter that refused to vote for Mrs. Prasad Bisesa in 2015 refused to vote for her in 2020 is going to change their mind between 2020 to 25 and decide that, all right, I'm going to choose Mrs. Prasad Bisesa now? Like, explain what kind of voter you think that is, because I can't predict a voter like that. I have never met someone who holds that view. I have never met someone who was against Mrs. Prasad Bisesa in 15, against her in 20, but is now Team Bisesa in 25. I don't know which political cohort that is. The switch over from Rowley to Young, okay. Maybe there's a chance that if the PNM faithful don't like that switch, they may not come out in numbers to vote. That's the only thing I could predict. You're hoping that the PNM faithful would be so upset by the switchover between Rowley to Young that they stay away from the polls. And if they stay away from the polls, okay, the UNC might win. But I don't know if I think the PNM faithful are that upset about Young. I don't see the evidence to suggest that. I just don't. I think if the PNM faithful were that upset about the switchover to Young, they would be making noise still about it. Because some people made a little slight brouhaha. I remember Miss Batiste Primus, this guy who was Minister of Public Utilities for a short while. They made a little small noise about the switch in the earlies. But then after their Balize House meeting, all of them zipped them out and went back into the line. I don't think it has that big of a fallout. It's Neil says the PNM would win because their members vote for them regardless. The truth is, it's Neil, we have a problem with that in Trinidad. I think the UNC has more people that vote for them regardless. The PNM has a larger contingency that they could lose. People would be happy to vote for the UNC if they were proposing something different. I think so too. You says, so who is going to capitalize off the PNM African base? Now the PNM face showing. Like, I always tell people, I don't think that is true. I don't think the PNM is a party built on race. I do think the UNC is a party built on race, and I know the start of that, some people would be like, well, see your party card showing, but no, I do think the PNM is built on some prejudice, but it's on class. The PNM, I think, in my view, has always been a party built on class prejudice more than racial prejudice. That's why the PNM has always been a kind of multiracial, multi-ethnic party. Until Dr. Rowley, the PNM wasn't known for real hardcore Congo bongos, if you get my drift. Dr. Williams, he wasn't a real Congo bongo. Chambers, he certainly wasn't a real Congo bongo. Even Manning isn't on the... when I say Congo, you all understand what I mean, because we're talking race, realities of race in this country. Use as race is the best political tool someone needs to capitalize off this switch up, or it's wasted. It's not going to work because, as I said, I don't think it has that. I don't think it has that juice. It doesn't have that juice. The racial dynamics, like, you need to study the racial dynamics. Were you asleep in the history classes or in Caribbean studies? The Afro-racial dynamic isn't as insular as the Indo-racial dynamic because of historical reasons. So yes, I do think the UNC is or has more of a racial affinity. I think that should be obvious to everyone. But I don't think the PNM does. So I don't think they're losing a large number of votes by that. No, it's not going to happen. And which party is going to capitalize on that? It's not going to happen. When people understand that this is really a class issue, change may come. It might. Like I always say that it's why the two parties kind of go past each other in certain lanes, because I think the PNM is fighting on a class base and the UNC a bit more on a race base, so they aren't actually fighting the same battle. And that's why I say I don't see how the UNC wins this. I don't see how the UNC wins this. And if you look at it from the class view, Rowley and Young are the same. Dr. Rowley lives in Goodwood Park in the West. Dr. Rowley has or at least had an apartment in Woodbrook Place. His townhouse in whatever the Bacchanal place was in Tobago. His ranch out there in Tobago. This man isn't a lower class guy. He isn't in the same familiar category as the people arguing and fighting right now in Sealots. You understand what I mean? And that affinity affects their thinking and messaging, which came out in the campaign in 2020. They were oblivious to their messaging. And that's why I think Mrs. Prasad Bissessa beckoning to race in the run-up to this election, I think it's a losing battle. I think it's a losing battle. And I think it's why the UNC always needs alliances to win. Because I don't think there are enough Indo-Trinidadians on a pro-racial head enough that a pro-racial Indo party in Trinidad will win. I just don't think it's how Trinidad is set up. You just can't win like that. Look, you look at it and their party keeps fragmenting. Their party keeps fragmenting. They can't even hold the Indo base all under the same umbrella. Guyana, you can. Well, Guyana is a different country than Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't know all of Guyana's politics as intimately as I know Trinidad's. But you keep fragmenting with that. The idea doesn't hold sway. Like the Michaela Pandey cohort, that group of voters, and I mean, it may not be a massive group enough to win an election, but I believe Michaela Pandey represents a cohort from the UNC, a certain type of voters coming out of the UNC. People whose parents were UNC loyalists, but they're now advanced, educated people. They aren't PNM believers. They don't think the PNM is the right party. But you aren't going to get them to follow the same UNC of old. You aren't. You have to evolve the party. And the thing is, I believe, so what's the best tool to use against the PNM? Class warfare? Maybe. Because the idea of 2010, the partnership, was the idea that all of society is going to come in there to have checks and balances so that we could all get rid of the elite PNM that has been running the country against the wishes of the majority. If you could get that idea to hold again, and I think you can. And I think if you go down the class line with Stuart Young, you may actually get more traction. You get the country to believe, like, and Mrs. Prasad Bissessa hearkens to fragments of it, but she doesn't hold on confidently. A populist UNC leader, like Watson Duke attempts to be populist. If a Watson Duke-like character, maybe not the man himself, and this is not to say that I believe in Watson Duke as a politician, because I don't, but if a Watson Duke-like character takes sway of the UNC, like, I think even Mr. Austin Jack Warner, with the corruption allegations that are hanging over his head, if he takes control of the UNC, because Mr. Austin Jack Warner is of that populist ilk, he is going to spread the money and tell everyone that the rich people are holding it back from you, and we are going to help each individual. We are going to give you what you rightfully need. The elites are against us. That's the kind of messaging they need. The elites are against us, and that's why they put in Rowley from Goodwood Park, and Young from the West. You all notice the PNM is just people from the West, a whole set of people from the West that's seeking the interest of the people from the West, and they have no interest in the regular Trini. That's the messaging that's going to hold. Because wanna bet Eastport of Spain doesn't see eye to eye with Goodwood Park? Stuart Young has said will be the best enemy to wage class warfare, but too much of the UNC from the same. Indy Bisan says she needs to step down and find a new leader to lead the party. I agree. Cuban says Watson Duke would have progressed more if it wasn't so scandalous. And to some extent, that's the give and take of characters like that, eh? Like Mr. Trump, he is unsavory in certain aspects, but that's how you get populist characters. He is like the regular man. That idea, like the regular man. It's Neil says like you launching up your party. That speech could work. Yeah, but in Trinidad context it wouldn't, because we are a two-party system. First past the post leaves people at two parties. So I think the populist message will work in Trinidad, but I don't think a third party could come in with a populist and win. I just don't think so. Maybe if it wasn't a parliamentary system, if there was a system where we voted for executive leadership, maybe a singular populist leader would win. But we don't do that. We vote for MPs, and the MPs select the prime minister. So in order for a third party to win, they have to field a slate of candidates that would be successful in winning the majority of seats in the country, and then the leader could win. Because let's say I am very convincing on a populist message. My name is not going to be on the ballot book in every constituency. I could only represent one constituency. My team would have to win the majority for me to get that leadership position. So it's a fault of our system to some extent. Maybe if the UNC, I always say this, I think if the UNC hired me, I feel I could win a landslide with the UNC. The UNC has the perfect setup to win a landslide over and over and over. They have the surest, strongest, immovable base. They are something like mid-teens, 14, 15 seats or something like that the UNC has never, will never, could never lose. Never. They are not going to lose it. Mrs. Prasad Bisasa could never resign. She could go straight till she ready to jump in the grave. Maybe even from inside the coffin, run as the leader, and the UNC is still going to win those 15 seats. What that provides is a beautiful launch pad to win from. Once you get a leader that could appeal outside of those seats, because you don't even need to appeal to those seats. Well, Wide Leather, they lost Chaguanas West an internal election. Let's be honest about that Chaguanas West. People like to quote that Chaguanas West to show that the UNC safe seats aren't as safe. That's not true. They lost Chaguanas West to Jack Warner and the ILP because Jack Warner campaigned in Chaguanas West. I am from not Chaguanas West, but nearby. Campaigned in Chaguanas West on the ticket that this is basically just an internal UNC squabble. So what they did in Chaguanas West was basically it was an internal election, and Chaguanas West voted to tell the UNC they want Jack Warner. But then when Jack Warner took that seat and the ILP and then started working against the UNC, and the general election came, and Chaguanas West saw that this ILP isn't UNC Part 2. This ILP is a whole next party. Did ILP win Chaguanas West in the next general election? Not even close. Not even slightly. Not even slightly. But yeah, the UNC has the perfect launch pad because of those seats. So if they get someone that could appeal wider than their safe seats, because they don't need to appeal to the safe seats, they are safe. If they could get someone just to appeal to that wider group, sell off. How are they going to lose? How? Is there any hope seeing real political class warfare in the next 10 years, or it's hopeless? I would offer a guess that I would say it's hopeless. Of seeing, not hopeless, let me not use the word hopeless, but I don't think we are going to see the real class warfare like that for several issues. For several reasons. Trinidad isn't poor enough to be desperate enough. Trinidad isn't poor enough to be desperate enough to have that kind of class warfare, at least not yet. The middle class in Trinidad is relatively comfortable. A point I almost always make is Trinidad, yes, there's a lot of corruption, yes, there's a lot of wastage, but life in Trinidad is actually relatively very comfortable. The part of Trinidad that is legitimately a nightmare is the crime situation. Crime is, no argument, crime is a nightmare. But crime isn't exactly the trigger for class warfare. The general earnings, what you're able to buy, how you're able to live, the luxuries you're able to access. Trinidad is relatively comfortable. So it's going to be a little more difficult to just push that out there. Maybe if someone within one of the parties goes down that direction, maybe. But it's not in the PNM's interest. I don't think the PNM is ever going to get a leader of that ilk, because that's not in their interest. They represent a lot of that higher class, so no. And the UNC, I don't know. I don't know. It just doesn't seem likely either. It doesn't seem likely either, because the stranglehold that Mrs. Prasad Bisesa has makes it difficult. And even if you get rid of her, are you going to get someone from that class warfare level? I don't know. I doubt it. The kind of loyalty that Mrs. Prasad Bisesa has within the UNC, you get the feeling that even if or when she's ready to leave, the next leader is going to be someone loyal to her. You know, like how Barack Obama, former President Obama, seems to have an outsized level of influence over the Democratic Party for the last nearly 20 years, since 2008. Well, 2004 was his first term, was it? 4? No, 8. Since 2008. There are people who say, up till now, who say that he had 4 terms. He had his 2 terms, 3 terms. His 2 terms, and then Biden's term. He is still, to some extent, in charge of the party. And I could nearly feel that about Mrs. Prasad Bisesa. The kind of sway she has over the UNC base right now, if you are going to attempt to take over the UNC anytime in the foreseeable future, you kind of need her blessing. And you have the aspirational things like Starbucks all over the place making people feel good. Yep. We just aren't in the sufferation scheme enough. We aren't in that level enough. You're not getting... You see, in order to have the real class warfare, people have to feel like, I have nothing to lose. But Trinidadians have things to lose. You don't get people with things to lose to stir up that kind of class warfare game that you're looking for. He was the de facto political leader for 16 years. Yep. He still is, I think. I still think he is. This country is the perfect design plantation. Well, that says something about the designers of the plantation system. That their system still to some extent exists to this day. Trinidadians are not suffering, Abdul says. That's what I said. Who you think is the best person in the UNC to lead them into the next election? Sure. Here's the problem, Indy. A lot of the best people to lead the UNC have been kicked out. Yes, sweet Douglas, looking to end now. You're right. a lot of the best people to lead have been kicked out. Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, I think, doesn't want strong leaders that could usurp her close around. She doesn't. So, I don't know if there is any that I would say is the best like that. Anita Haynes is the most likable, but she isn't the strongest leader. I wouldn't say her. I wouldn't say her. Best and controversial. It's a controversial thing to say, but if you're looking for a populist leader, very likely you're looking for a meal. That's up to you. But yeah, populist leaders are generally, they fit better into the meal scheme. Yes, Mr. Saddam Hussein seems within the UNC, maybe, but I don't know how his national appeal might work, because he is very young. I don't know what his family is like, if it's going to have that kind of appeal. I don't know. Within the UNC. I think when Vasant was looking for it, he may have had that. Abdul. He may have had that possibility. Mr. Barrett may have had the possibility when he was looking for it. Who else? Who else is there? There aren't many charismatic male leaders out of the UNC. The only one really is Dr. Munilal, and Dr. Munilal isn't liked on a national stage, so I don't know. Ha! He could try. All right, people, that's all I have for now. We are after 12, we are after midnight. We went a good long time. So I am bidding you farewell. March 16th, Bobby head gone. Bye, Bobby. Bye, Dr. Bubs. Hold it down. All right, people, I am out. I hope you're educated, informed, and entertained. This has been the Mindful Life Show. I'll be here again tomorrow. Hopefully, we could start a bit earlier, so you don't have to be here after midnight. But it was nice nonetheless. Thank you for tuning in. I am Nathan Springer. I'll see you guys in the next one. Let's see if there were any comments over there on the tubes. Good night, Kareem Delpesh. Always a pleasure, bro. You're always loyally tuned in over there on YouTube. Always a pleasure. Thank you for tuning in. All right, people, if you are still tuned in on YouTube and looking at this on the repeat, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed and drop a comment. If you listen to this to the end, you can't listen to this to the end without telling me that you did. Even if you don't have anything real to say, at least just type, I listened to the end. Thanks. All right, people, I'll see you in the next one.